Okay, let's get this straight real quick because this has been apparently an issue that some people have voiced to me about my Ford bias, right? Okay, here's where I'm going to talk about Dodge because after the freaking April Fool's joke, okay, here's the thing. Okay, everyone knows I'm a diehard Ford guy. If you watch my videos, you know this. I don't like GM. I liked him at one time. I used to have a Chevy. My first car was a Chevy. It wasn't a truck, but piece of junk anyway. But yeah. And then I had a Ford, and I said, "Wow, this is much better." Okay, here's where I'm going to talk about Dodge because apparently this is whatever. Okay, and I'm talking about trucks because Chrysler, I don't think can make a good car to save their freaking life, except maybe the old what were the big guys? The Grand Fury and the Diplomat. But trucks, because Chrysler's cars don't count. I like Dodge Rams. The Ram trucks, I like them. I actually like Ram trucks, believe it or not. They're my second favorite line of trucks next to Ford, of course. And I can tell you what, the second-gen Rams that everyone seems to hate, I like them. The third-gen Rams, everyone hates them because they're cheap. Yes, I will admit, Rams do have some weird problems when they age because Chrysler is weird like that. But here's the thing, okay? And it's mostly Chevy guys. Ford guys hate on Ram too, but let me tell you something. Chevy guys give Ram guys a hell of a hard time. But here, okay, let's talk about it this way. Your garden variety Cat Eye Silverado, right? Oh, Dodges have weak transmissions. Have you heard of the 4L60? Do you know about the 4L60? That is a notoriously garbage transmission. Now, it is so garbage that people are actually dedicated to rebuilding them now, which is fine. So when you say Dodge transmissions are crap, have you forgotten about the 4L60? GM had their fair share of issues too. But the 4L60, yes, you can rebuild them, but that's not the point. You can rebuild the Dodge too. You know why you don't see as many people doing that? Because they never sold as many. Ram and Dodge have always been catch-up to Ford and GM. Ford and GM have always been above Mopar. Mopar has always been the third place, unloved, stepson, sister of the big three. Mopar literally has never been above Ford or GM. Even when GM was above Ford, Mopar has always been third. And, don't get all offended. It's just true. Yes, they built better sports cars probably in the 60s. They had the sport market, but they've always been third, okay? And then you talk about, okay, here's the engines. Back in the day, okay, yes, the 4.7 is a garbage engine. The 5.7 has its fair share of issues, but so does the 5.4 Ford engine. So do the freaking GM engines with the stupid cylinder deactivation. They got issues. Go back in time to when Ford was still doing the 2-valve engines and when GM was doing the 350, 305. Dodge had the 318 and the 360 twins. Those engines are freaking damn near bulletproof. That's Ford 2-valve 4.6 and GM 350, not 350, I'd say 305 reliability. I mean, and they're cheaper too. And you know what else Dodge does that Ford and GM don't? Painted frames. If you live in the north and you don't like your frame to rot, you pretty much have to get a Dodge. Because Dodge, as bad as the bodies rust, so do GMs for that matter, but don't tell them. Dodge painted their frames. I don't know when they quit, but the second-gen Rams and I think the third-gen Rams had painted frames. So you could have a body that you touch and it falls apart to pieces. Frame won't do that. The frame will be solid. Ford had issues with their frames, and GM had, I think, slightly less issues. GM hasn't had as many frame issues. They have more body issues. Ford has more frame issues. But you want a good frame, you have to get a Dodge. You have to. They're the only one of the big three that did that, painted the frames. Interiors are cheap. This will be the last part I touch on because I wanted to keep this short. But Dodge interiors suck. Okay, Mr. GM guy. Let me see your Cat Eye Silverado, and if the headliner isn't falling, and the seats aren't ripped, and all of the buttons aren't green, and actually that was the later Chevys, and the shifter doesn't flop around, and all of the window switches make creaking noises, and the door panel feels like it's going to fall off, and you have to slam the hell out the door, I'll give you $50, because I bet you can't do it. You won't. Yes, Dodge interiors are crappy, but so are GMs. You go to the second-gen Rams, the interiors aren't nice, but they're not all falling apart like a GM. They're not. GM has struggled with interiors since the 70s. Also, the fact they look horrible. Stupid two-piece dash design that GM trucks have. It's awful looking. Ford is kind of right in the middle. They've had some good years and some bad years. They're usually better than GM, but they've had their fair share of issues too. But so when you say, oh, Rams have garbage interiors, so do Ford and GM. Especially GM. GM, I don't think, can build a good car interior to save their freaking life. And I don't think they have since about the 70s. So I'm going to keep this short, but you want me to defend Dodge? Here you go. I like Rams. They're good trucks. They work hard. They really don't die. Take care of a few common things like you would with a Ford or a Chevy. You got yourself a good truck, and probably cheaper than a Ford or a Chevy too. I could have thrown Nissan and Toyota in here. Nissan, I hate Nissan, all of it. I don't really hate any car company, but Nissan is pretty freaking far up there. And Toyotas are totally in a different league. So there you go. Dodge is not shit. Some of them are. MDS and the 4.7 are garbage, but so are some of Ford's engines, so are some of GM's. So that's it. I'm going to be done, but this is just, all the Dodge hate, and especially from the Chevy guys, all the Dodge hate. Well, number one, I drive a Dodge over Chevy any day. If I didn't have an F-150, I'd have a Ram. In fact, I looked at Rams when I was getting that truck. So yeah, you can say all you want, but remember, Mopar ain't as bad as you say. Just because they've always been number 3, that doesn't mean that they're terrible, because I think that GM and Ford both, I think Ford to a degree too, they've made some garbage, especially GM. You have a company when the letters stand for garbage motors, you know where you're at. So that's it, but that's just my little PSA. Remember that you make fun of Mopar, well, Mopar ain't as bad as you say. And I know I've worked on all 3 of them, and Ford's still, to this day, probably one of the harder ones. GM is in the middle. Rams are usually pretty freaking easy. I've had the least amount of stress working on Rams, believe it or not, at least under the hood. Everything else is totally different. But under the hood, yes, Ford does have some troubles with that. I don't know why they can't put a damn oil filter in a good spot to save their life. But so that's it. Chevy still sucks. I still hate it. It's still garbage. But Ram? No. Once again, good years, bad years, just like all cars. But Rams, they deserve more respect than they get. Again, just because they're third place doesn't mean they suck as bad as a Chevy. So don't be sour because your Chevy's a piece of junk. Bye-bye.